NSC spokeshuman John Kirby took to the podium yesterday to talk about the destruction of the Kakhovka Dam in Ukraine and also answer questions about a Amazon Post story that suggested that the U.S. had intelligence that Ukraine was planning an attack on the Nord Stream pipeline. And the question, of course, is then for all of the consternation and accusations that the Russians blew up the Nord Stream pipeline as a as a demonstration of self-sabotage to try to curry favor or cast Ukraine in a negative light. So first, on the destruction of the Kakhovka Dam, that's led to evacuations and flooding, and we don't know how many deaths yet. John Kirby was not conclusive in terms of responsibility. Remember, this dam is in an area that's occupied by the Russians.
We've seen the reports that Russia was responsible for the explosion at the dam, which I would remind, Russian forces took over illegally last year and have been occupying since then. We're doing the best we can to assess those reports, and we are working with the Ukrainians to gather more information. But we cannot say conclusively what happened at this point. We will certainly share more information when we can. What is clear, and what we absolutely can say, is that the damage to the Ukrainian people and to the region will be significant.
And on the Nord Stream pipeline?
There's a report in the Washington Post that the U.S. had reports that Ukrainians were planning an attack on the Nord Stream pipeline. Do you have any comment on the intelligence report of that? And there are also suggestions that Russia may have been responsible for that. Why was Russia initially, figures pointed at Russia when the U.S. might have had information that Ukrainians were planning this?
So I'm certainly not going to engage in a discussion about intelligence matters here from the podium, specifically with regard to that disclosure or any of the other. And in this case, certainly not going to speak to one that the Washington Post even said was not corroborated by U.S. intelligence agencies. Now, I think there are 3 countries conducting an investigation of the Nord Stream sabotage, and we called it sabotage at the moment, Germany, Sweden, and Denmark. Those investigations are ongoing. And again, the last thing that we're going to want to do from this podium is get ahead of those investigations.
Oh, yeah. I can't wait for that investigation to be complete. And boy,
I'll believe the Swedes over the U.S. government.
Well, maybe there was a time when the U.S. intelligence community not corroborating some report carried water. That time is largely since passed, largely because of fork-tongued spokeshumans like John Kirby and the actual politicization of these agencies. Kirby, a little follow-up on this matter, more generally speaking, came from Real Clear Politics' Phil Wegman, who wanted to understand what the regime's position is more generally when it comes to Ukrainian offensives inside Russia. Are we still demanding that Zelensky segregate his U.S. support for only defensive or counteroffensive action? Here was Kirby's response.
As I said earlier, if Russia is concerned about Ukrainian military capabilities, the best thing that they can do would be to leave Ukraine. We have made our concerns about strikes inside Russia very clear to Ukrainian officials. They've acknowledged that we have, and they have assured us that they won't use U.S.-made equipment to strike inside Russia. We don't want to see the war escalate, and there's no apologies for that. But I won't go into detail about the private discussions that we're having with Ukrainians.
So you can't tell us whether or not, other than expressing you don't want an escalation, you can't tell us if there's any conditional...
Oh, this is the repercussions. Look, I think just take a look at everything we've done in the last 15 months, and I guarantee you're going to see additional security assistance packages in coming days and weeks. We're going to continue to make sure that Ukraine can succeed on the battlefield, as President Biden has said, for as long as it takes.
Mm-hmm. We've been getting a lot of dare I say, misinformation on the war effort in Ukraine, including what we found out from the leaker. Not that that was the way to find it out, but found it out we did. That what was being said publicly was not consistent with the assessments that were being made privately by John Kirby and his friends. And now we have this story about the Nord Stream pipelines sabotage and who might have been the responsible party. Whoever was the responsible party, maybe there is a rationale for it, since that would disrupt Russian energy flow, but the lack of forthrightness and of shuffling it off to our Western European allies to do some sort of investigation that will be the proverbial ship that finds no port. It doesn't inspire a lot of confidence, at least for me, and that has nothing to do with my desire to see Russians repelled or Putin deposed. It just has to do with the desire to be leveled with. For more on this, pleased to be joined by Noah Rothman, senior writer at National Review, author of The Rise of the New Puritans, Fighting Back Against Progressives' War on Fun. Noah, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
What about Kirby's responses to the dam that collapsed or was blown up, as well as the Post report on the Nord Stream pipeline?
Well, I certainly can accept the premise. It never seemed to me as though it was impossible to believe that Ukrainian saboteurs, although it's a significant operation in terms of just tactics and logistics, were incapable of that. There are quite a lot of times in this war when Western commentators have assigned to Russia actions that I thought were perfectly within the capabilities of Ukraine to pull off. For example, a rather demonstrative drone strike at the top of the Kremlin. Even the Institute for the Study of War said, well, this is obviously a false flag. Didn't make any sense to me at the time. They had been conducting drone strikes on civilian infrastructure inside Russia. Actions inside the Belgorod region right now, which are not being conducted by Ukrainian troops, are being conducted by Russian citizens that are supported by Ukraine, materially supported by Ukrainian artillery fire, but the actions on the ground are being conducted by Russians. And it's a little frustrating to hear from the administration directly and on background in so many other reports. They expect to see drama, dramatics, he uses this word all the time, dramatic changes, shifts on the battlefield, given that they've been throttling the support that they're providing to Ukraine. So we're going to give you X amount of whatever. We're going to give you this. Maybe you'll get some M1 Abrams tanks sometime after Labor Day. But we expect to see drama, and we want to see it right now, or else your funding might be cut off. That's not really within our purview. We're not entitled to dictate terms to Ukraine. I know that sounds very frustrating for people who assume that Ukraine is some sort of a proxy for the United States here. But if they're a proxy, they're a terrible puppet. They do a lot of stuff that we don't necessarily want them to do. And frankly, it's not in our purview to say that. When you invade a country, you cross their borders, guess what? The country you invaded is under no obligation to respect your borders. That's just not how this works. And it's a bizarre assumption that we can dictate terms to Ukraine. In fact, it's a kind of chauvinistic assumption that you used to see it exclusively on the left, and now you see it on the right, which kind of assumes that all actions in the world happen because we dictate them, or that it's a response to our non-action. And it assumes that we have a lot more power and authority and competence than I think we've ever demonstrated. Do I think Ukraine blew up some civilian infrastructure to damage Russia's capacity to export oil to Germany? I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised. Do I think Russia executed this attack on a piece of infrastructure that it owned, a hardened, difficult to destroy dam? You can't just blow it up with a missile strike. You got to demo this thing.
Right.
Do I think they did that in order to demonstrate, albeit deniably, that they have the capacity to escalate this war and imperil civilian population centers, render them unlivable? Yeah, I absolutely do. I think that's the message they're trying to communicate here. They are not on equal terms. They're not something you can compare and contrast and say, well, this is just like that.
Yeah, but that's a secondary issue, though. This is the primary issue, which I mentioned, is that we're not getting straight information from the administration on this. and they're propagandizing to us about Ukraine and overstating the case that doesn't need to be overstated. To your point, so you can tell me I'm not going to tell you, but you can't tell me that you can't say one thing to me publicly while privately you believe the opposite. And that's what they've been doing. And that's a problem. And it's also a problem, to your point, when Zelensky gives an interview to the Wall Street Journal saying, well, we're confident about the counteroffensive effectively, but hey, this can go a lot of different ways. This is complicated. This is a slog. He was trying to temper expectations while, as you say, you have U.S. interests, U.S. officials that are promoting, drama and marked demonstrable success that we can report back on how good the war effort's going.
Yeah, I understand the concern. There's just a certain level of operational security that precludes us from having a full accounting of events as they're ongoing. This is as close to a total war as we've seen since 1945. It's a war for survival in Ukraine. Yeah, they propagandize. Yeah, they promote misinformation. That's operational security. And I don't feel as though the United States is obliged to violate their operational security just so that I have a full accounting of events, even if it jeopardizes the course of those events.
But since we gave them $75 billion, doesn't the United States have a say in this war and what Ukraine is doing with the money and what their goal is?
To a certain extent, but not to a great extent. No, we're providing them with security assistance. That security assistance is used as they see fit. And that is part of the terms of these agreements. Now, yeah, we oversee it. Yeah, we have inspectors general who oversee where this money is going, audit and the funds and the military equipment. But we don't dictate terms on the ground as to how they're used. If we were to dictate the terms as to how these were used operationally, tactically, in minute to minute, it would be a disaster on the battlefield for Ukraine. Thank God we're not.
Yeah, well, unless we want to come to an agreement about Operation Control, which I wouldn't support, then I agree with you about that. But it's also very politically short-sighted to engage in misinformation, because when it comes out that you're telling me something different than you actually believe, I'm talking about American. I'm not the American government. I'm not talking about Zelensky in Ukraine. Then that waters down support for continuing to provide that security aid.
Yeah, I absolutely understand what you're saying there. I'm not sure if we can point to an exact moment where the administration has deliberately misled the public here. They've been perhaps a little more coy when it comes to the Nord Stream pipeline than they should have been. But the verdict was out and remains out. So insofar as they're saying, well, we can't put a finer point on that, they're not wrong.
Well, I understand, but
eliding details.
But the Nord Stream pipeline is not. I mentioned the other problem, the leak from that kid up in Massachusetts that has intelligence officials saying one thing and the public-facing representatives of the Pentagon saying something else.
Yeah. So those leaked documents, I have every reason to believe they were valid, but they were a snapshot in time. And they were talked about in April. They were drafted in February, and they were talked about in April as though they were still operative, when we had plenty of information to suggest that the Western Alliance that had received information in February suggesting they were short on ordnance, short on this, short on that, and then provided that subsequently in the intervening weeks, that was elided from the conversation, as though that this snapshot in time had not been resolved. And it prompted this bout in the press of self-doubt about the Ukrainian cause, and it was valid based on the information that we had at the time, but it didn't account for the information that we had accrued in the 6 weeks that followed. And I subsequently don't think that they're operative now. They really weren't operative when they were leaked.
I want to get to Joe Biden and the latest and greatest with the move by the House Oversight Committee to hold FBI Director Wray in contempt. Comer saying yesterday in an interview with Just the News, I can say based on unclassified and legally protected whistleblower disclosures, the FBI source on the allegation that Joe Biden received a bribe, and now they're saying from someone in Ukraine, the FBI source had been paid at least $200,000 by the FBI since the source was opened and operational. High dollar payments obviously mean the FBI believes the source to be credible and reputable. What is your assessment of this drama, if you will, between the House Oversight Committee and the FBI, specific to this information the FBI apparently had in 2017 and is now being resuscitated by the House Oversight Committee?
Yeah, so the FBI has been playing fast and loose with regard to its obligations to the legislative branch. As an executive agency, it's responsive to the legislative branch as an oversight body, and then it stonewalls, and it's very evasive. And I can only defer to my colleague Andrew McCarthy at National Review, who's a finer legal mind than I am, who certainly seems to believe that Comer had Director Wray dead to rights in regards to the suggestion that he could be held in contempt for his behavior towards Congress. Now, a deal seems to have been worked out between them in the interim, and that's sort of the way these things normally go. Insofar as it's not politically advantageous for the House to send the FBI to the rack, and it's not necessarily, even though a lot of people would like to see it, that's not necessarily the most productive course, so I understand why they would have done that. But the FBI seems entirely resistant to self-policing. The Durham documents couldn't have been more plain insofar as there was a concerted effort to mislead the courts by the FBI, which is a crime. It's a prosecutable offense. But you can't really figure out who did it. Can't really figure out how to make sure this doesn't happen again. That's unacceptable. Should be unacceptable.
And we're never going to know,
involved.
right?
Well, and not to mention some detailed accounting for what the FBI did or didn't do, and why, with respect to this whistleblower information that they had in their possession for 5 years or 6 years.
Yeah, something like that. Again, I mean, I'm persuaded that even something like a cleaning house operation in there and internally wouldn't get the job done. There's a significant amount of moral self-righteousness that we see from agents who convince themselves, in particular when it comes to Donald Trump and the people around Donald Trump, that the procedures that preserve the rule of law, preserve the reputations of these agencies, just aren't really all that important, particularly when it comes to the related Russia probes. There's a sense that you get from these documents and the conduct of the agents and the agency that they just think that the means justify the ends. And that is the decimation of the very concept of the rule of law. It undermines the idea of impartiality in a justice system in ways that the FBI doesn't seem to really consider valuable or relevant, but the legislative branch surely should, as the most responsive branch of Congress, the one that's closest to its constitutional duties. They should be very jealous protectors, jealous stewards of the concept of impartial conduct of justice. And the FBI is falling dramatically out of favor with Republicans. Yeah. And Republicans aren't going to be out of power forever. And the FBI would be very short-sighted to think that it can conduct itself like this in perpetuity without consequences.
Right. Fauci is science, and the FBI director is the law. This is where we seem to be at. Noah Rothman, senior writer at National Review, author of The Rise of the New Puritans, Fighting Back Against Progressives' War on Fun. Noah, thanks as always. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
It's news, opinion, insight. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
When life ends, your legacy begins. Ensure your legacy lives on at Catholic Cemeteries of Chicago, with 47 locations throughout Cook and Lake counties. Take advantage of 0% financing, lock in today's prices, and safeguard yourself against rising inflation. Visit CatholicCemeteryChicago.org